delightful. That is how I sum up this next conversation. I believe that it is important that men have a voice on this podcast, and it's always refreshing to get a different perspective on the intricacies of male-female relationships. There really is no mystery here, ladies. At the end of the day, men and women want many of the same things out of their relationships, but the route to getting there may be where the confusion lies. One thing that cannot be overlooked is simple biology. Once we wrap our arms around the fact that men and women are wired differently through years and years of evolution, can we have a meeting of the minds and find common ground? Health, wellness, career, relationships, and everything in between. We're removing the taboo from what really matters in midlife. I'm your host, Michelle Folan, and this is Asking for a Friend. Welcome to the show, everyone. Our guest today is a dual-trained endocrinologist and geriatrician who lives in Perth, Western Australia with his wife of 20 years and their 4 children. He is the director of the Murdoch Endocrinology and Diabetes Center and the head of the Department of Geriatric Medicine at Royal Perth Hospital. Dr. Ricky Arenson has helped over 30,000 patients. He holds numerous medical awards and was awarded a Lifetime Outstanding Service Award by Royal Perth Hospital. He is the author of the book Women Are Superior to Men, and he has written over 100,000 pages about human sensitivity, conflict management, and happy, productive marriages. He has also founded several businesses, owns a private medical practice, and is a stand-up comedian. Is there anything you don't do? Dr. Ricky Arenson, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor and privilege.
Well, we're so glad you're here. I would love to know if there's any other details you'd like to share, family, school, like where you're from and all that good stuff.
Well, I actually come from Cape Town, South Africa. So I lived through quite interesting times because I grew up in apartheid South Africa, and I actually lived through the time that Nelson Mandela was released from jail and the transition into a democracy and the tearing down of apartheid. So that was really, really interesting. I mean, I even went on marches with friends against apartheid and got shot with, of all things, the police actually sprayed us with weird purple ink. So I don't know what that was about, but at least we didn't get shot. So yeah, it was an interesting time to live through. I met my wife in South Africa at medical school. We got married in South Africa, moved to England, and then we moved here, and we've been here for 20 years. We've traveled around a bit and seen a few interesting things.
Well, that's wonderful. You've been fortunate then, so good for you. And you're in Western Australia, so it's winter over there and later in the evening. We managed to make this work, so I was very happy about that. You made some observations as a doctor about the longevity in your patients' lives. You said there was one thing that you feel contributed to that long, happy life. What was that?
Well, it's interesting. I always, whenever I meet a patient over 100, I always ask them their secret. And I'm hoping that they'll say something like, I eat a lot of goji berries, or something easy that we can all do. And most of them just stare at me like I'm mad. And a lot of it is good genes. But it's interesting that of all the happy elderly people I meet, most of them are happy because they are in long-term happy relationships, or they've been in a long-term happy relationship. They're surrounded by their families. And I think it's fascinating in society because there's direct evidence, the Harvard study of adult development, which demonstrates that long-term successful relationships leads to longer life. So people who forge bonds with other people and make happy relationships are actually healthier and live longer. And I think that makes a lot of sense because we know that stress shortens life, that anxiety is bad for people, and that being happy and being loved is actually something that not only does it keep people motivated to stay alive, gives them a reason to live, which is a big thing in life. I've seen many patients die because they just didn't want to live anymore. So I think it's almost a sad thing, but we see in society something of a move away from valuing the family unit, valuing long-term relationships. And we have a much more narcissistic time where people are so focused on their own feelings. But the sad irony of that is that focusing on other people is actually what makes people happy.
Oh, and that makes so much sense. We've talked about this a little bit on the show about the importance of women having long-term friendships and keeping those long-term friendships alive. On the flip side of that, it seems like men sometimes don't foster those types of long-term relationships as much later in life. Have you seen that as well?
Well, I have seen later in life is that a lot of men are totally useless when they get old, and it's a real problem. So in geriatric medicine, the women tend to manage when they're widows. They manage at home and they can take care of themselves. But you leave an 80-year-old man at home and it's an absolute disaster half the time. Genuinely in geriatric medicine, it's a real problem. They can't take care of themselves. But I think there's something fascinating about medical evidence and about scientific evidence in that women actually connect much more easily with emotion than men. Now, that is not a sexist statement. It's actually a scientific fact. Women connect more readily and more powerfully with emotional memory. And I think it's an amazing role that women play. They're emotionally very connecting. So I think with marriage, what you often see is men are silly, bounce around characters, and they bump heads against each other and drink beer and swear. You've got all these women who are 19 or 20. They're often quite adult, quite mature. I know because I teach medical students that most of the young women are actually adults. The men are not. And they marry someone and the women connect the family. They connect with that man and they bring out this emotional connection. I mean, it is true that men are very obsessed with sex, especially at a young age and often at an older age as well. And so men do pursue women for sex. I mean, it's a natural thing and it's something we shouldn't hide from. It's true. And there's nothing insalubrious about it. It's the way we're designed. And yet men are pursuing women for sex, and then women connect emotionally with those men, and suddenly they have a relationship and a marriage, which is not really about sex. It's about love, and sex is a very nice part of that. I think it's a wonderful role that women play. The problem for men, I think, it's actually fascinating, just to break from that men actually use the opposite side of their amygdala when they are connecting with emotion to women. So we actually have a different physiology for the way we connect with emotion, which is remarkable. But I think one of the problems for men generally in life is that they're very unifocused. I say in my book, men are mission machines and women are care machines. And I do believe to some degree that's true. So men, they often get stuck in their career. They're very focused on that mission. And they don't always spend the time building those relationships. I mean, even in my own marriage, it's quite interesting. I'm quite happy to go to work and work for 15 hours a day and work really, really hard. I've got all these projects and missions. My wife really wants to have a lot of friends. And I don't have time for friends. I'm too busy. But in older age, that's a very negative thing. I'm very lucky because I've got a wife who's connected to me. We've got kids. We're a happy family. And that's really what you hope when you grow older. You've got your loved ones around you, your children, your grandchildren, and you start to live through the connection with them. So I think you're right. Men can often isolate themselves emotionally because they're so focused on other things. And that's definitely not a healthy approach to life.
You decided to write the book Women Are Superior to Men, which I thought at first was a bit tongue-in-cheek for your title. But I believe now that you were serious and you were making a statement. I find that very interesting for a man to write a book with that title.
Yes, it's such a fascinating time we're living through because everything about this sort of powerful feminism in the world and promoting women, and I almost feel like to some degree we're so political and everyone's very angry at the moment that we stop noticing the beautiful things that are in front of us. And for most people in the world, the thing that makes people happy growing up is having an amazing mother. It doesn't mean that fathers aren't great parents, but Mother's Day is a very special day because mothers are just so giving to their families on average, because there's some that aren't, but most are. And many of us men are very, very lucky to have amazing wives. Women are extraordinary in their own right. Yes, the title of the book is a bit tongue-in-cheek, but what I actually wanted to celebrate in the book was the fact that women are amazing. I don't need them to be in a movie killing people with a sword or arm wrestling men or punching men in the face to be amazing. They're actually in their own right, they have all these amazing qualities. So when I wrote the book, what I wanted to bring up was two things really. The first was, I think that we have abandoned the concept of normal as if it's something dirty and horrible. You don't need to cancel normal to tolerate people who are different. Just because something is the average case doesn't mean we shouldn't. Tolerance is actually about tolerating people who are different. You can't be tolerant if you're only tolerating people who like you. That's not tolerance. That's just like-mindedness. I think we've cancelled normal, but for most marriages in the world, and I find this fascinating, the same fights take place between men and women. When I talk to my friends, the men and women are fighting about the same things. Most of the women are bothered about the fact that their husbands stomp through piles of dirty clothing, and they go, how can they not notice? How do they walk through that and not notice? Whenever I have a patient who's read my book, they all say to me, the women all laugh about the fact that men can't find things in cupboards and fridges. It's in every household in the world. So I wanted to laugh about that and make people feel normal and enjoy it and just say, hey, it's so funny. We all have these same problems and it's actually funny.
What do you think, in your experience, is the number one thing that couples fight about?
I always think there's serious fights and there's less serious fights. I think in terms of serious fights, the biggest thing that couples are actually fighting about is not getting the right kind of attention. That's what evidence actually shows. The biggest cause of divorce is that people go, I wasn't getting enough attention from my partner, which is fascinating. But in terms of other things that people fight about, I still think sex is actually the thing that, from my experience, people fight about the most. And that's probably because you're seldom going to get a couple that have a completely matched libido. That's just not the way the world works. And for men particularly, tend to be quite libidinous at the best of times. And I write about this in my book quite sympathetically because I'm quite sympathetic to myself. Like, it's a real need. And I think women tend to often be more about emotional connection. And so sexuality is very much connected to that. When the relationship's working, when the mood's right. And maybe for young hormonal people who are 18 years old, people are having a lot of sex, maybe for the first year of marriage. But after kids and breastfeeding and staying up all night looking after babies, a lot of women still getting pursued around by their husbands. The husbands get frustrated because they really, really do feel this need. And the women are like, hey, I'm really, really tired. I do like you, but maybe not tonight. So I think that is a big cause of fighting. And I talk a lot about that in my book, how to resolve those kinds of issues in a healthy way. I think, again, there's a lot of propaganda about the sexuality of men being a bad thing. And it really isn't. It's a very natural thing. And if you look at all species of mammals, the men are pursuing the females around, trying to mate with them. That's the way we designed to survive. And sex should be a bonding, connecting experience that's positive for both partners. I mean, it doesn't cost anything. It's free entertainment. What could be so bad about that beautiful physical connection? Well, at least that's what I tell my wife anyway. She doesn't always agree.
Well, how do you suggest then we get on the same page in regard to intimacy?
Well, I think the first thing we can do as a planet in general is stop being so hostile about everything in the world. Not you, Michelle, because you're not at all hostile, but I'm saying the whole world is so hostile about everything. We've kind of gone to this point now where we're almost saying that sexuality is something bad. Like when men are trying to pursue women, it's actually something bad. Everything's negative, and if a man looks at a gorgeous woman in a certain way, that's bad. Well, that's not bad. That's actually natural and normal, and that's the way we should be. Sexual attraction between men and women is something magical, and it drives survival of the species, because that's what we need to do. We find each other attractive, we get together, and then we emotionally connect, and as a bonus, might get to have some sex as well, which is awesome. So I think one of the things we can start doing is being a little bit more positive about sexuality and seeing it as something positive, and for men and women alike to see it as something positive. So I think the next step towards that, and that's what very much the focus of my book, is for men and women to try and understand each other a little bit better sexually. So for women to understand about husbands that they're not being difficult when they are being sexually demanding. They're actually experiencing a physical need that's actually positive. And I think a lot of women like the attention, even when they're not in the mood for sex all the time. They actually like the fact that their husbands or boyfriends find them attractive. It's actually quite nice that every time you walk past your boyfriend or husband's eyes light up and they're like, wow, you're gorgeous. I just want to touch you. There's something very positive about that. And from a male point of view, to understand that women often very hardworking. Both of you are looking after the kids, but the women just have a lot of emotional drain, I think, from families, and many of them are working and all these things. Their sexuality is a little bit different to male sexuality. So for a man, you have to be emotionally connected, sympathetic, communicate well, and give the woman what she wants. And I think that's probably, again, this mismatch of attention. If men want to be sexually demanding, but not also give the woman what she needs, and that may be many different things. It might be washing the dishes. It might be giving her the right kind of emotional attention, setting the mood, all the things that she needs, because it's not just about you and your physical needs. So I think once both of you become preoccupied with caring for the needs of the other, then everything should fall into place, because the wife wants to satisfy what her husband needs, and the husband wants to satisfy what the wife needs. And also sensitivity. I mean, it's no good, I think, if your wife's exhausted, coming home and sort of shaking her awake and saying, hey, it's that time of the evening again. I think that's an incredibly cruel thing to do to another human being.
Well,
sorry, I just have to tell you something really funny.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm interrupting myself for a bizarre story, but it's actually a true story. So in South Africa, a married couple I knew who were perhaps less socialized than you and I. So what happened is, there was actually a burglar in their house. Someone had broken into their house. And the husband shook his wife awake because there was a burglar in the house. And she said to him, come on, it's 2 a.m, leave me alone, it's not that time. And he was like, no, you don't understand. And she rolled over, she's like, no, just let me go to sleep. And there was actually a burglar in their house wandering around. So
yeah, I don't think I would want to be woken up at 2 a.m. for that. I will tell you, sleep is a premium when we get in midlife, and getting woken up at 2 a.m. for anything less than a burglar would not work in our household. I will tell you that. You said something before that I thought was interesting about we have to know each other and what makes us tick. I think on both sides, we probably have to have that awareness of our love language. So what is it that makes us feel like we're cared for and loved? I call it the foreplay. The foreplay starts in the morning. It goes all day. So it's how we treat each other and how we interact with each other all day long that can set the tone for what may happen in the evening. That was one point that I wanted to make. The other one is, I know for men, nothing is more powerful than when their spouse or partner initiates lovemaking. That in itself is very powerful for a man to not have to always be the one pursuing that. I just wanted to throw that out there.
No, I totally agree, but I think it would be a mistake to say that men and women are not both human. There are some differences between us, but overall, we're just human beings who have the same needs and the same emotional design. The differences between us become pronounced because they're obvious, because they're differences, but the sameness is less pronounced, and most of it is sameness. So humans want to feel valued, and they want to feel needed and wanted, and an emotional connection. It's very, very difficult to be rejected all the time. So if a husband or wife is pursuing their partner, and it may not be for sex, it may be for attention, it may be for love, it may be for something that they need, and they're getting pushed away all the time, rejection is a very painful experience. And it's also exhausting. People start to lose hope, and they start to become unhappy and resentful because they're just not getting what they need. So you're quite right. It's amazing for either partner. And I think this goes for the other way as well. So I'll give you a really good example. So yes, definitely very keen on women initiating sex. Men will. It's wonderful because it's hard for men if they don't feel like their wives want them. They want to be desired by their wives. They're human beings like everyone else. We want to feel good about ourselves. I think one of the fights that happen often in couples goes the other way, where women really want their husbands to spontaneously do things for them that they want. And then they won't tell their husbands. And then the husband comes along and goes, hey, why didn't you just tell me you wanted that? And I would have done it for you. And the wife says, because my whole problem was the fact that you didn't know that that was what I wanted. You should have known that, and you should have done it without me having to ask. So in our family, for example, I know that my wife really loves going on long nature walks on a Sunday. And if I can come up with like a spontaneous plan to take her somewhere, I don't know, men are very bad often at that kind of thing. I don't know why. I've heard a lot of wives complain, like, why can't men just make these kinds of plans? But if I could actually make a plan, take her somewhere nice, new that she hasn't been before, Better still if I could actually pack the picnic for the family, although would probably leave at about 2 p.m. instead of 11 a.m. if I do all of that. But it's going out of your way to do things spontaneously for your partner that are specifically for them. It's a very powerful statement. I'm not doing this for myself. I'm doing this because I love you and I want to make you happy. And that's why I've come up with this on my own.
Part of that is in most relationships, there's one person who doesn't really want to maybe discuss the hard stuff. And you talk about the mysterious empty box that men sometimes retreat to. So what other reasons are they retreating into their proverbial box? Because we all, as women with spouses or partners, we've all experienced that where men get very quiet and they don't seem to want to talk about what's eating at them.
Yes. I think that if there was some kind of, we should actually invent this together. You just have like a model of a man sitting in your house. It's not a real man. It's just like a model that women could just go and shake and go, why won't you just talk to me? It would make a lot of women in the world feel better. I think it would be a bestseller for us. So yes, it's interesting. Men have very compartmentalized minds and women have very diversely active minds. And that's been proven on functional brain mapping, that women's brains are lots of stuff going on, flying around in their heads all the time. Whereas men tend to be like, that's it. They focused on that one thing. And you can't, any man who says to his girlfriend or wife, yes, I can type on my phone and talk to you at the same time. Rubbish. Everyone knows they can't. I think for men, they have this very compartmentalized brain. They move from one box to the next. And there is actually this weird empty box in male brains. It's metaphorical, where they go into this place where there's nothing going on. And it's a place that men sometimes go, I think, to unwind, to escape from stress, to escape from unhappiness. And they just go and sit there in that box quietly. And I think, for example, look at fishing. I mean, I don't think there's no women in the world that will go fishing. But most people I know who will go sit on a boat in a river for like 6 hours, staring into space, holding a fishing rod with nothing going on, it's usually men. Like, women have things to do. Like, they're thinking and they're busy and they'd be like, oh, what's going on at home? Where are the kids? What's happening? The men are just sitting there with a fishing rod in that empty box. And I think even watching sport to some degree, men, they just stare at the screen. But there's nothing going on in their brains other than they're connected with the sport on the TV. There's nothing going on in their own brains. It is a very male thing to do. And I think it's also a defense mechanism that when men feel emotionally threatened, then they retreat. Whereas women, because they are by nature emotionally connecting, they advance and try and connect. And it's difficult because the women are right. I mean, men have higher suicide rates for depression. And I think one of the big reasons is because the women are, even if they're depressed, they might be more prone to actually connecting. And that's what they need to do. If you're depressed, you need to reconnect with your life and connect with things and other people and emotionally. And withdrawing when you're depressed is a terrible coping mechanism. It doesn't deal with any of the problems. It just makes you worse. So I think for wives, that's often a big challenge because there's a fine line there. If men really do need a bit of space and they go into the empty box and you invade that box, but they're actually gone there to escape from you, then they're going to push you out, reject you. They're like, I'm actually here because I want to get away from you. Why are you coming into my special space? But at the same time, men do need to be coaxed out of that space because it's a very unhealthy way to manage relationship problems. So give them a little bit of space and then say, hey, we do need to talk about this and have emotional connection and conversation, communication. You need to do those things to solve problems. Sitting in your empty box is not going to solve anything.
That's a great point. I'm so glad you mentioned that because we've all been there where you kind of can tell they've got a lot on their mind. I don't mean to be funny, but I often think that men like to mow the lawn. That's another one of those things, kind of like your fishing analogy, where they go out, it's loud, they don't have to talk to anyone, they're in their own zone. Yeah, it's just therapeutic to go even to do that.
So, Michelle, I think there's something brilliant in what you just said. Firstly, I think it's amazing that you're so sympathetic to that because a lot of women get very angry about it and are quite resentful about it. And you've got a sympathetic approach, which I think is amazing. But on the subject of men mowing the lawn and getting stuck in these sort of, in mental health, it's been shown that when people are not coping, when they're stressed, when they have chronic fatigue, when they're not coping with their jobs or their lives, one thing they need to do is create a mental space that is completely away from that stress. special mental space away from stress. So for women, it's so fascinating. I think many of them do that by emotionally connecting. When they're stressed, they go and meet their friends for coffee and then they talk. But for men, often, they go and mow the lawn. So it's a very different coping mechanisms, but it's creating a mental space where you're not thinking about your work problems and you're getting away from that into a special space where you can just relax. Sport is very much like that. You're relaxed, you're thinking about the sport, you're not worrying about, what's going on at work, hopefully.
When you and I first spoke, we were laughing about, and this happens at my house all the time, and I know other listeners will identify with this. A man is looking for something in the cupboard or a drawer and can't find it, even though it's right there. And you had a really good explanation as to why that actually happens.
Well, thank you. It actually happened just before this interview because my wife had packed away my microphone and I couldn't find it. I had to call her and she got really cross because it was right in the cupboard in front of me. So it actually happened literally in real life just before this interview. Men are designed from an evolutionary point of view to be hunters and protectors. That's our job. And we have our bodies' physical advantages to allow us to protect our families. And there again, I think it's sad that that's become political because men love protecting their wives. And most women actually feel much safer around their male partners. And it's not a sexist thing. It's because that's actually what men were designed to do. And we all get existential pleasure from doing the things that enable survival. Even animals do. Cats love scratching boards, and dogs love chewing bones. Whatever you need to do to survive, nature encourages you to do that by actually giving you pleasure in doing it. So, for example, many women love breastfeeding and nurturing babies because it's actually a survival instinct. Men are specifically designed to hunt and to protect. And when you are hunting or protecting, if you're fighting in a war, you have to be unifocused because your only thing is to spot an enemy and shoot them and not get shot yourself. There is no mental space to be thinking about what homework's due the next day or, which child needs to be picked up from dancing at 4:00. That's not what you need to do at that time. You're trying to survive. And even if hunting is very dangerous, it's very easy to sustain a bad injury hunting. And so you are very unifocused in the way you do things. So the male brain is very much unifocused. It lasers in on one spot. And so when men look into the fridge to find something, their brain actually has a lasered idea of exactly what they should be looking at in the fridge. So if they're looking for the butter, they're looking for it in a specific carton. And if their wife's bought butter with a different package, they won't see it. If it's in the wrong spot in the fridge, they won't see it. They can stare all they want, but they have this tunnel vision looking for exactly what they think they should be seeing. And if it's not in the spot they expect it to be, doesn't look exactly right, they just don't see it. And they invariably call their wife, "Honey, you didn't buy any butter." And their wife's like, "Of course I bought butter, just bring it here." And then 10 seconds later, the wife marches over, finds the butter, goes, "What is wrong with you? How could you not see that? It was right in front of your eyes." And it happens to most of us every day.
It is genetic. It happens here all the time. And I know people are listening and they're going, "Oh my God, it happens at our house too." So anyway, and you said something else here. Even with kids out of the house, women will still be carrying the brunt of the load when it comes to household stuff, right? How do we as women, once we get in midlife and the kids are out of the house, what's the best approach to getting some equity with some of the daily chores and household responsibilities?
Withhold sex until the husband behaves. That's just a joke, but it's It does work. Definitely works. Look, I actually think there's something fascinating that I only really worked out recently about women that's actually won't alleviate your question. I actually think because women are so emotionally connected and caring by nature, that they always have a harder time than men. My wife and I were thinking about this recently because when kids move out of home, the men are still worried about going to work, playing golf, whatever they're doing, and the women are still worrying about all their kids. It's actually quite interesting. There's such an emotional connection that women have that they really are quite burdened by that for life. There's no question in my mind that the level of emotional energy that women put into caring so much about all the people connected to them is a much greater drain in many ways than men who, again, just focus on these things that they want to do. They're very mission focused. So in terms of household equality. Look, from the far end of the scale, I deal with old people, and I was actually had this in my office this week. I had this crotchety old guy and his very pleasant wife, and she read my book and she was laughing about it. And she and her daughter were both at the appointment. They just went like, "We're never going to get him to change," and that's actually true. I think once someone's 85 and set in their ways, you're not going to get them to change. But I think one of the things that women really should do, and I've actually taken aside women getting married that I know and said, come and have a chat to me. I think it's quite important to set a precedent from early on that it isn't actually fair for women to do all the work and for men to just take advantage of that. My wife was very good with that. When we got married, she said, I'm a doctor, you're a doctor, we're both working full time. Why should I do all the cooking and cleaning when we get home from work at the same time? Of course you should help me. And so we shared all of that between us. And that was, I thought, a very fair arrangement. But she was also extremely fair the other way. And I think this is where people get it wrong. They're so into the politics of it that they don't think about being fair. So when she was at home with the kids and I was working late and coming home, she said to me, of course I'm not expecting you to do all the things that I can do because I'm at home the whole day. Of course I'm going to do, you can't possibly share the exact same burden. And she went further because at one stage in my career, I'd become a head of department and I was dealing with setting up a private practice and I was just working super, super hard. Well, what was happening is I was coming home from work really, really late, 9, 9:30, 10 at night. I was exhausted. And then I really just didn't feel like washing dishes and doing housework. I was just too tired. And then she said to me, you know something, you're exhausted. You're working really hard. It is for the family. We do need this. I'm going to do those things for you because I can see that you need that. And I think that's where people make this mistake. It isn't about gender roles. It's not about having the same formula as other couples. It's about both partners looking at their partner and going, what does my wife need? What does my husband need? And taking care of them. And therein, I think for husbands, if they really care about their wives, they should care about their wives being happy. And it's not fair to someone to make them do all the work and take advantage of them. And in saying that, one other funny thing, there are very good studies that show, and this is fascinating, that show that in the modern day, we're actually having less sex than people were 50 years ago, which is fascinating because sexuality has become so popular in the media. Everything is sex. Everywhere you look, everyone's having sex, and there's contraceptives and things people didn't have 100 years ago. It's very easy to get hold of. It's not to fall pregnant, and there's sexuality everywhere, and it's promoted without the taboo of old. And yet, couples are having far less sex than they did 50 years ago. And the only couples who are actually having as much sex as people were 50 years ago is couples where the husbands are sharing the housework equally. So it's a very fascinating evidence-based issue.
Yeah.
And I think it's a reason for that because I think it shows that it's a healthy marriage. I don't think it's really that washing the dishes is going to get you more sex. I think part of it is that a husband who cares about his wife is going to help with the housework, and his wife is going to respond by the relationship being better and healthier, so people want to have sex with each other because they actually like each other. Whereas if the wife's exhausted and washing dishes, she comes to bed later, she's tired, and she's resentful. And she's like, hey, you've been lying upstairs watching TV, I've been washing dishes. Like, this isn't fair. That's just one unusual, fascinating fact.
That is very fascinating. And I think much of this starts with good communication. This is all good reminders here.
My wife's communication is very good. She just gives me orders and I just follow them.
Well, if it works, right? Dr. Ricky, I wanted to ask you, what's next for you? Anything else you're working on?
Yes, I am currently getting through my second book. At the moment, it's actually called Spaceship Parenting. And it's about an alien coming to Earth and seeing how badly we're all parenting and how miserable and angry all our children are, and teaching me the basics of what it takes to be a good parent and how their advanced species has mastered parenting. So I hope to have that book out next year. I'm doing a podcast series called Happy, Healthy Ever After, which is about promoting positive male-female sexuality and relationships and trying to get away from all this negativity in the world that men and women shouldn't like each other. I think we like each other plenty, and I think it's a good thing to get out there and say, hey, falling in love is amazing. Having kids together is amazing. Being married is amazing. There's no reason for all this negativity about everything.
Oh, I love that.
And I might practice a bit of medicine here and there as well if I'm in the mood.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, I do want you to let me know when the next book comes out because I would Love to have you on again. And then also, please tell the listeners where they can find you and also find your book.
Thank you. Well, drrickyarenson.com is my website, and that's got all my details on it. I'm also Dr. Ricky Arenson on Facebook and Instagram. And hopefully when I join the 21st century, I might even get on other platforms as well. But definitely my website and Facebook and Instagram, I'm easy to find and really happy to chat to people if they're interested in anything. And my book's available in America on Amazon.com.
Perfect. And I will put all that in the show notes. Dr. Ricky Arenson, I want to thank you for being on the show today. This was a lot of fun.
So lovely to see you again.
Nice to see you too. Follow Asking for a Friend on social media outlets and provide a review and share this show wherever you get your podcasts. Reviews and sharing help us grow.